seen people torn apart in alleys with their mouths still open in prayer. I've pulled children from buildings where the ceiling came down before the rest of the world could blink. I've been shot at, bombed, hunted through mountains, and dragged through the mud in corners of the world where diplomacy meant nothing. I've seen what men do when they're starving and have nothing left to lose. I've watched my team get picked off by camouflaged enemies. I've held friends as they bled out and made promises I couldn't keep. War doesn't change you. That's a lie people tell themselves to explain what they've become. War shows you what you already were. If there was fear inside you, it pulls it out. If there was rage, it makes it louder. I stopped being surprised a long time ago. And that's exactly why they picked me. They called us Phantom Echo. On paper, it doesn't exist. We weren't Navy or Rangers. We weren't Recon or Delta. We were the ones who got sent when all the regular tools broke. When whatever needed to be handled wasn't the sort of thing anyone could know about. I didn't ask too many questions. I'd been in Phantom Echo for 3 years when it happened. We'd seen some strange operations before. Chemical labs buried under deserts, tunnels that weren't on any maps, places soaked in blood but scrubbed clean of names. But nothing came close to what we walked into that night. We got the briefing in a hangar outside Quantico. There had been a string of killings over the past 2 months. Isolated, rural stretch in the northeast, dense forestry, minimal cell coverage, maybe 3,000 residents spread across a county that used to rely on timber and animal testing grants. The facility in question hadn't operated in over a decade. It had been tagged for demolition twice, but nothing ever came of it. Locals referred to it as the doghouse, which told us enough about what went on in there. 2 deputies were sent in after someone called about movement inside. Neither one reported back. When dispatch tried to reach them, radios were dead. That would have been enough to raise concerns anywhere else, but in a town like that, things fall apart without anyone noticing. So they sent backup. 10 more went in, same facility. No one heard from them either. That's when we found out it had hit the desk of our handler. She didn't say much. She never did. Just told us the official story was that it was a missing persons case, local law enforcement still handling it, and there was no federal involvement unless a body turned up. But some of those missing officers weren't strangers. One had served with Ruth before retiring into a small-town police work. Another had trained with Nolan when they were still in the Corps. We pushed back hard, told command we had enough ties to justify insertion, told them we didn't trust local resources to manage whatever was happening inside that building. There was hesitation. They gave us the usual boilerplate about overstepping jurisdiction, about optics, about resource allocation. But we kept pressing. Eventually, they gave us a single directive. Go in quiet, observe, report, and get out. We came in under a thick canopy of early fog. The dirt road up to the warehouse had been overtaken by weeds. Gravel kicked into furrows from where cruisers had pulled off in a rush. We rolled up in 2 matte black Suburbans, the most technologically advanced Phantom Echo transport. The vehicles coasted to a stop in silence, engines off the second wheels touched the outer perimeter. We ran cold. That meant we weren't using lights to start with. If something was watching from inside, we weren't going to give it a head start. There were 3 cruisers parked haphazard across the lot. One was angled sideways, halfway across a patch of overgrown moss concrete. Driver door hung open. Another had its rear light still pulsing red through the mist, casting slow, bleeding strobes against the trunks. Spectre 1, dismount, I said into comms, voice low but steady. Spectre 2 on me. 3 and 4 take rear approach. 5, 6, hold perimeter until breach confirmation. Acknowledgements clicked back immediately. We moved clean. Spectre 2 came up on my left. Ruith. Quiet, focused, always squared away. Spectre 3 and 4 joined us, and we peeled off behind the building, boots crunching lightly against frost-dusted gravel. 5 and 6 stayed near the vehicles, rifles shouldered, scanning the tree line. Nobody said a word beyond call-outs. That was how we operated. The warehouse stood 3 stories tall, though the upper floor looked partially collapsed. Grey cement siding, stained in vertical streets from rain and time. A rusted loading dock door was sealed shut by a chain that had already been cut. Bolt cutters still sat nearby, blades rusted at the hinge. The main entry was a double-wide security door with one panel cracked open about 2 inches, long enough to get a boot in. I raised my fist, held it for 2 seconds, then dropped it forward. Breach signal. We flowed in smooth, formation tight, rifles up, muzzles low but ready. Interior was cold, stale. The scent of mold hit first, then dust. We swept left and right, corners, ceiling, undershelving. Light beams moved in unison, cutting through darkness with surgical rhythm. Spectre 1, first floor clear on entry, I said, pressing the mic clip to my shoulder. Marking doorways, holding for deeper push. Copy, came back from 3. Rear side's negative, 1 broken window, 2nd level, nothing else, clear. We moved room by room. First man slices the corner, 2nd watches high, 3rd moves through the threshold. The 4th holds the rear. 2 keep watch on all 4. Doors are intact, no forced entries. Paperwork still sat in trays, as if abandoned during a lunch break no one ever returned from. Whatever happened here hadn't started in a panic. It had sunk in low. Spectre 1 to all units, I said, advancing north corridor, staging at interior junction, maintain sweep until next ping. We had cleared the northern section and regrouped at the main junction. One person was missing. Spectre 3. Then his voice came in over comms. Contact, possible access point, south wing, utility corridor, moving to investigate. Spectre 1 copies, echo actual, regroup on Spectre 3's position, keep visuals tight, weapons hot. We formed up and moved quickly, clearing the stretch with practiced discipline. Spectre 3 and Spectre 4 were standing in a narrow service hallway, their lights aimed at a collapsed shelving unit that had partially buried a stack of old maintenance crates. Behind the debris, flush with the floor, was a square hatch. Metal, aged to a reddish brown, edges warped with rust. A short length of chain hung from the side, snapped clean through at the center. It had been locked, once. Spectre 6 adjusted his grip on the rifle and knelt to inspect the latch. Blood, he said. Old, but not dried. Looks fresh compared to the rest of this place. I stepped closer, pulling the flashlight from my vest to get a better angle. The hatch was scored along the edges, as if something had clawed it open from underneath. The flooring around it had scratch marks leading inward. "Stack up," I ordered. 2 and 3 on breach, 4 and 6 secure the perimeter, 5 stays on overwatch. Spectre 3 braced the hatch, counted down from 3, and pulled. The metal groaned against the frame before lifting with a crack. The smell hit instantly. Chemical rot. Beneath that, something else, sharp and oily, biting at the back of the throat. We dropped chem lights into the dark below and waited for them to settle. They clinked against concrete, revealing a vertical shaft with rebar, studded rungs bolted into the wall. Spectre 2 went first, then me, then the rest. The air grew colder the further we dropped. My boots hit the basement floor with a sharp slap. The walls were a mix of bare concrete and panels of old surgical tile, greenish grey, cracked in places. There were drains spaced every few meters. The whole place had been designed for runoff. One main hallway stretched forward, framed by doorways on either side. Heavy industrial fixtures hung from exposed beams above us, most of them flickering, some dead. The hum of the electrical grid echoed through the walls with an uneven pulse. Some of the lights buzzed as if struggling against resistance they couldn't overcome. "Spectre 1 to all units," I said. "Interior secured. Basement layout seems consistent. Commence sweep. Pairs. Gold, blue, red. Maintain radio discipline." Teams acknowledged. We broke off. That corridor, long, curved, windowless, disappeared around a bend that none of us could see past. It had a feeling to it. We had no idea what we were walking into. "Gold advancing ahead," I said into the comms as Spectre 2 and I pushed deeper into the corridor. The curve of the hallway gradually straightened, stretching toward a heavy door at the far end. The other teams peeled off ahead of us, each taking one flank. Our boots echoed across the concrete, the sound swallowed by the close, lifeless air. Blue team clearing room 10, negative on contact. Red team entering storage, blood on walls, no bodies. I glanced toward Ruith, Spectre 2. He gave a sharp nod and kept low. His rifle moved in tight arcs across the hallway as we advanced. My own breath started to slow. Training made your body control fear without even noticing. Muscles steady, steps measured. But something about this place started pulsing against that discipline. We reached the final door. It was sealed, heavy, with a forced viewing panel fogged from inside. No visible locks, just a steel handle slick with something red that had dried in sharp-edged streaks. I raised a closed fist, signaling the breach sequence once more. Ruth stacked beside me, checking his 6 and then looking forward. I gave the countdown with my fingers. 3, 2, 1. We breached. The smell was worse than rot, worse than dead, decomposing bodies. It was the stench of blood broken down in heat, metallic and wet, but turned thick by time. A meat stench soaked in ammonia and something sour like digestion. The room beyond was wide, its walls tiled in the same cracked surgical green, and the lights buzzed with a low, uneven hum. They were all there. The missing officers. 12 bodies, maybe 13, It was hard to tell if it was even a body. Strung up from the ceiling by their own veins, the tissue had been pulled from wrists, ankles, even faces. Some had cords of vascular tissue looped through eye sockets and threaded into the rafters. Others had their arms opened at the elbow, the tendons splayed and pinned apart, as if someone had tried to peel them into patterns. One man's legs were bent backward and suspended by ropes of ligature carved from his back, tethered to iron scaffolding like a grotesque puppet. One officer's face had been sliced vertically down the middle, split open to reveal muscle and teeth, the two halves hanging open, draped across his shoulders. His eyes were still wet. Ruth dry-heaved beside me. He lowered his rifle for a second, bracing against the wall. "What the hell? What is this?" he muttered, voice clipped, trying to stay on comms protocol but failing. I stepped forward, barely managing to steady my grip. "Spectre 1 to all teams," I said, louder now. "We've located the officers. They're deceased. Multiple units, heavy mutilation, intentional positioning. This is a kill site. Repeat, this is a..." A burst of screaming cut across the radio. Sharp, violent. Gunfire immediately followed. Rapid bursts, some automatic, some staggered and wild. "Contact, contact! Red team has movement. Blue team, we're hearing the fire. Red, report." Then more gunfire. No return call. I looked at Ruth. His face had gone pale beneath the tactical helmet. He adjusted his rifle and nodded once. Neither of us spoke. We turned back to the hallway. "Spectre 1 to all units," I said into the radio as we backed out of the flesh room. My voice was steady, but I could feel the tremor at the edges. "We need a regroup. Repeat, we are regrouping. Meet at center corridor, intersection of sectors. We seem to be compromised." "Copy that," came from Blue Team. No response from Red still. Ruth was at my side again, rifle raised, scanning every shadow that shifted across the tile. The hallway swallowed sound in a way that made it difficult to tell where gunfire had originated. Somewhere ahead, but muffled, smothered by the bend in the corridor. My boots struck the concrete with a hard rhythm, and I could hear Ruth's breath catching beside me in short, sharp pulls. We cleared the first curve and spotted Blue Team moving fast toward us. Two silhouettes framed by flashlight spill, their beams cutting through haze that hadn't been there before. There was condensation gathering along the walls, smeared in wide, greasy arcs. The air had grown denser, thicker, as if something had shifted in the pressure around us. "Blue Team, status?" I called out. "Negative contact visual," came the response, hasty and clipped. Something moved across the hall. No silhouette, but the lights went out for 2 seconds. Full blackout. Red Team hasn't responded. We passed their last known location. No visuals, no bodies. We fell into step. Blue Team at the front now, Team Gold trailing behind. Formation was loose. Tension had crept in without anyone admitting it. Every rifle was up, safeties off. We didn't wait for full regroup. The priority had shifted. We needed eyes on Red, and fast. The hallway's second curve was just ahead, cutting off our view past a column of load-bearing wall and a row of sealed doorways. The overhead lights grew more unstable. Then, Blue Team stopped. They just froze. One of them raised a hand, flat and trembling. Contact. Front, he said, low and tight through the comms. We held our breath. The other, barely above a whisper, followed with, "What the hell is that thing?" He didn't finish his sentence. The gunfire started without another word. Flashlight beams danced across the wall as one of them staggered back, shouting orders we couldn't make out. Rounds ripped through the dark ahead. Muzzle flashes lit something massive, tall enough to nearly reach the ceiling. Hunched, but fluid. For a second, I saw something move. A ripple across flesh where flesh shouldn't have been. Tendons stretched over a bone structure that bent in directions I didn't understand. Then it vanished from view. Ruth raised his rifle, finger to trigger, but couldn't fire with blue team directly in the path. Neither could I. We just watched. And in front of us, the corridor became a slaughterhouse. The lights above us dimmed all at once. The hum of electricity dropped into a low register, as if the voltage itself had been pulled through a filter. Ruth stepped beside me, frozen mid-aim, his rifle still trained ahead. Blue team stood just ahead of us, still firing. Their muzzles lit brief fragments of something. Then I saw them. From the ceiling, above the nearest support beam, something began to emerge. Thin tendrils slid down first, translucent and shimmering in the flickering light. They pulsed with a thick fluid movement, undulating in short jerks. Then more followed. I tried raising my gun, but they dropped too quickly to react. They hit the floor like ropes soaked in blood. One of the blue team operators, Santos, saw them a second too late. A long, fleshy appendage coiled down behind him. It reached across his shoulder, fingers made of living surgical tools, scissors of folded cartilage, syringes filled with amber-colored fluid, barbed hooks embedded directly into pink muscle. The limb moved with no sound, but the twitch of wet tissue stretching under strain. Before Santos could turn, a needle rammed into his shoulder, plunging deep with no resistance. His scream cut through my headset with such rawness, I dropped my finger from the trigger. It wasn't a shout of pain. It was shock, terror, betrayal by his own body. His limbs convulsed. The veins in his neck swelled, black against the skin. Then they began to move. The needle dragged upward, lifting him by his own circulatory system. His body went rigid, arms flailing once before they locked. Blood vessels stretched from his skin, pulling free with a sickening pop as the flesh tore. He rose into the air, his body unraveling, veins peeling from his limbs like pulled wires, muscles splitting apart in ribbons. His scream collapsed into a gargling moan. Then nothing but air moving through torn lungs. I grabbed Ruth by the back of his vest and pulled him, forcing us both into motion. Our boots pounded against the concrete, water and blood slick beneath our soles. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if that thing was behind us. I only wanted walls between it and us. We ran deeper into the corridor, past the junction, past the doorways we hadn't cleared yet. One of them stood half open, the overhead light inside flickering in dull pulses. An exam room by the looks of it. I swung through first, rifle up, eyes cutting across every shadow. Empty. Linoleum floors, an overturned gurney, a sink still stained with something that had dried into thick, crusty lines. No movement, no sound except the thudding in my chest. "Clear," I shouted. Ruth slammed the door shut behind us and braced his back against it. I grabbed a metal tray cart, flipped it, and wedged the corner into the handle. Then we both shoved an old filing cabinet against it, scraping it across the floor with a grind that felt bone-shatteringly loud. But we didn't have options. The lights above us blinked again, slower now. The ceiling fixture pulsed once, then went dim. We were left in the dull wash of emergency lights lining the floor, casting everything in weak red that made our skin look bruised. Ruiz's mouth was open. He was trying to catch his breath, but nothing came steady. I wasn't doing any better. My own lungs felt dry, hollow, as if the air had thickened around us and refused to be taken in. We scanned the room again, this time looking for cover. The cabinets wouldn't do, neither would the table. I spotted a storage closet on the far wall, the handle slightly rusted but still intact. I yanked it open, shelving lined the inside. We climbed in and shut the door behind us. There wasn't enough space to sit. We crouched, shoulder to shoulder, back against the steel wall. I could feel Ruth trembling beside me. I didn't blame him. My hands were shaking too. Then we heard it. Footsteps, or something similar at least. The floor groaned beneath the weight of each one. Whatever it wasn't rushing. One step, then another, then a pause, then more, back and forth, again and again. It wasn't searching. It already knew where we were. We didn't move. Our eyes stayed locked on the sliver of red light under the closet door. There was no mistaking what we were hearing. It was waiting. Twice, something dragged across the doorframe, metal scraping on metal, then something softer, a sound that reminded me of wet skin sliding against tile. The handle never turned, the door never budged, but it stayed there, breathing. Ruith leaned in close, his mouth almost against my ear. His voice was cracked and dry. "We need to go. If we sit here, we're done. You hear it. It's out there, waiting. It's gonna get in eventually." I turned my head just enough to meet his eyes. In the dim red light, he looked pale and soaked with sweat. His hands trembled around his rifle, not from fear, from helplessness. "If we move," I whispered, "we die faster." Ruth shook his head just once. "We can't stay here." I leaned forward, voice even lower now. "You saw what happened. I watched Santos dump an entire drum of 7.62 into it, full auto, chest, arms, center mass. It didn't even seem like whatever they were shooting at slowed down." I paused. The footsteps started again. I don't know if it feels pain. I don't know if it sees in the way we do. But I know bullets don't stop it. We try to run. It hears us. You go out there, Ruth. You know what happens. Ruth looked away, jaw clenched tight. Ruth tapped my leg once, then again. I looked at him. His eyes were no longer panicked. Something in him had hardened. The sweat was still there, and his chest still moved fast, but his face had gone quiet in a way that I had seen before. A decision had been made. "I've got a flash," he whispered. If I throw it far enough down the hall, draw it forward, I can loop back around, pull it away from this side. No, I said immediately. My voice was sharp, louder than I meant. I pulled it back in time. You won't make it. I might, he said. If I wait for the exact moment between steps, I can time the throw, make the move before it resets, get far enough before it hears the echo off the tiles. You won't make it, I repeated. We're gonna die in here if we don't try something, he said, pulling the flashbang from his vest. He checked the fuse, thumb running across the pin. If I make it out, I call for evac. If I don't, wait 60 seconds, then move. I grabbed his arm, hard. Look, he said, breaking eye contact with me. I'm not trying to kill it. I'm just giving us a chance. I didn't let go of his arm. For a second, we both sat there, frozen. Then he pried my fingers off, one at a time, and pushed the door open just wide enough to slide through. He paused once in the gap, rifle slung, flashbang in hand. 60 seconds, he said. Wait for the pop. The door clicked shut behind him. I counted the seconds in my head, but I never made it to 10. The flashbang went off, close enough that my ears filled with a solid ring. For a moment, I thought he'd done it. For a moment, I thought his plan would work. Then came the scream, but not human. The air behind the wall shuddered with it. Something massive struck the ground hard, a wet slam that shook dust from the overhead duct. Then another scream, this one human. I dropped my head, clenched my fists, and pressed my back against the wall. The screaming became an animal thing, sharp gasps between gurgling breaks. I heard bones crack, multiple at once, then a long, dragging scrape. Ruth screamed again, shorter this time. Then, nothing. I stayed in that closet, curled tight against the steel frame, hands covering my ears. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was filled with a slow dripping of something thick. Hours passed that way, maybe more. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't even know if I did. My body shut down at some point, but my mind stayed sharp enough to keep me awake on the inside. That kind of exhaustion eats at you differently. It strips away the fear and leaves something slower behind. So, when the sound finally came, it didn't register as real at first. Gunfire. Not the bursts we trained with, not our rifles. These were deeper and heavier, but unmistakable gunfire. Each impact sounded like it had metric tons of weight behind it. I straightened against the closet wall. My hands moved on instinct, clutching my rifle, though I didn't raise it. I heard boots hit the ground in tandem, orders shouted in clipped bursts, but I couldn't make out the words through the ringing that still haunted my hearing. Something massive hit the ground. Then, silence. This was the silence that comes after impact, the silence that follows certainty. The closet door swung open. My body folded inward before I could stop it. My hands shot up in front of my face. My breath hitched. Every muscle braced for pain that had already played out too many times in my head. But it didn't come. A gloved hand grabbed my vest collar and yanked me forward. My boots scraped across the tile and I landed hard on the exam room floor, blinking against the sudden change in light. A figure stood over me, motionless. He wore matte black gear, textured with a hexagonal weave I didn't recognize. The armor looked dense, layered with composite plates I'd never seen issued. His helmet was sealed. No eye slit, just a smooth black shell with a small set of circular vents over the mouth. "Who the hell cleared you for this site?" His voice came through a filtered modulator, deep and level. I opened my mouth. Nothing came. I tried again. "We were responding to a call. Local PD, missing personnel. We had..." He didn't wait for me to finish. He reached down, grabbed me under the arm, and hauled me upright with one hand. His strength was effortless, mechanical almost. I stumbled as he pulled me forward, back through the ruined exam room toward the hallway beyond. "Move," he said. I followed. There was nothing else I could do. As we rounded the corner back into the corridor where Blue Team had fallen, I saw the others. A full squad, all wearing the same armor. 6 of them, working in complete silence. 2 were standing beneath the scaffolding where some of my teammates and friends had been strung up. The bodies were still suspended, the veins pulled tight like wires in a loom. One operative stood on a portable rig, humming with faint blue light, using a blade that vibrated faster than my eyes could track. He sliced cleanly into the vascular cords, severing each. The other caught the fallen corpses in reinforced sheets of black mesh, wrapping them fast and sealing them with something that hissed when activated. I turned my head to the left. Another figure stood in the center of the hallway, over the remains of what looked to be Blue Team. There was almost nothing left. Blood soaked the walls, limbs had been torn into segments. One of the torsos had been fused to the ceiling above, veins pinned through the tile. The operative aimed a compact device at it, adjusted a dial, and pressed the trigger. Flames burst forward in a controlled stream, blue-white, hotter than anything I'd ever seen. The sound was low and steady, more pressure than raw. I watched the remains break down in real time. They just disappeared. I didn't even get to see Ruth's body. None of them looked at me. As we moved through the carnage, another operative broke from the group and stepped in front of me. He carried a device in his left hand, small, black, rectangular, with a ring of sensors pulsing around a central lens. He held it up to my face without a word, a sharp light flickering across his eyes. He glanced down, scrolled with his thumb, then muttered under his breath. "Minimal exposure, neural strain with intolerance, psychic contamination below containment threshold." The one who had pulled me from the closet turned to face me directly. Even through the modulated filter, his voice was colder than anything I'd heard in a briefing room. "You were never here," he said. I didn't answer. He reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out a small black envelope. Sealed, no writing. He shoved it into the front pocket of my vest, then stepped back without another word. I stood in that hallway, surrounded by the dying echoes of my team's final moments, and understood something that none of our training had prepared us for. I filed the report less than 24 hours after they pulled me out. Standard procedure, full after-action debrief, name, date, coordinates, objectives, outcome. except nothing I wrote down matched anything in the system. My clearance codes failed. My login access had been restricted. When I finally made it through to our handler, she stared at me across the screen without blinking. There was no deployment to that location, she said. I told her about the call. She didn't respond, just tilted her head and clicked through something on a second monitor I couldn't see. Her expression never changed. There's no mission filed under that directive. You've been on mandatory leave for 14 days. Your team is listed as KIA during a training exercise in Arizona. I told her that was impossible. She continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Your discharge is being expedited. We'll have a transport arranged within the hour. Further questions can be submitted through the medical review board. Then, the screen cut out. They sealed the identities of everyone on Phantom Echo. Official statement said equipment failure during desert training. No remains discovered. Closed caskets, military honors. I was not listed as present. When I returned to the safe house they had temporarily assigned me, I finally opened the envelope I was given. Inside was a single photograph, black and white, grainy, a figure half shrouded behind a surgical screen, limbs spread across an operating table that didn't have restraints. Its body was twisted, long, slick with something that gleamed under fluorescent light. The shape was human at first glance, but the proportions were wrong. Too much stretch across the arms. The fingers were extended, curved outward. On the back of the photograph, written in block capitals with a pen that had bled through the paper. The fingers were extended, curved outward. On the back of the photograph, written in block capitals with a pen that had bled through the paper. Containment Protocol. Marionette. And beneath it, a phone number. The military sent a psychiatrist. I told him nothing. He checked boxes, scribbled notes, and after the 4th session, submitted a recommendation for full discharge under psychological duress. I haven't heard from anyone since. I haven't heard from my handler, and all agencies screen my calls. I called the number given, and it was an arrangement to join a private military, presumably the team who came in and rescued me. Deep down, I want out, to put this life behind me. But I have a feeling that if I don't join, I'll disappear. KIA during a training exercise, and scrubbed from all records.
It's like, I don't know, this thing that I've developed. I can't even explain it. Jason was skinny and tall. He sat on the couch in my office, his eyes sunken in, bags beneath them hanging like rotted fruit. I was sitting behind my desk in a swivel chair, a clipboard on my knee with a sheet of notes on top, a pen in hand posed to write. I was relaxed and calm, mainly because Jason reminded me much like my previous patients, nervous, a bit paranoid or depressed, just like the ones that I had cured before. I was confident that if Jason were like any of those patients, that he would be cured as well. All it took was a little bit of time and commitment. To me, Jason was just another patient in my long line of successes and accomplishments. Could you try to explain it? I asked. I'd sound crazy, he replied, rubbing his neck. I smiled at him, and he caught the drift. How many crazy people have told you that they can see things before they happen, that they can see the future? He asked, his head bent toward the ground, his hands rubbing up and down on his forearm and legs. I shifted in my seat, watching him, waiting for something else, but there was nothing. I'd heard many stories, delusions, fantasies, and much like this one, I knew, I was sure, confident, that it was all fake. I've seen clients who suffer from disorders that can cause them to have those beliefs. I remember one client who had the belief that there were little fairies in his house that had disguised themselves as spoons. I replied calmly, adding in the example at the end to lighten the mood. But my example had no effect on him. Jason looked up at me, and he had the look in his eye, the one I'd seen in all my patients, that he was convinced his ability was not only incurable, but completely and totally real. Have you ever cured them? He asked. Every client of mine has ended up in a much better place than they had been, I replied. Jason chuckled. I'm not talking about your clients. I'm talking about their delusions, their fantasies, Jason said, and I stared at him, my light smile gone. Have you ever cured them? Well, if they are better off than they were, that would either mean the delusion is gone or at least kept at bay. Medications help with such things, as does therapy, I replied calmly and motioned at my office. Jason was quiet. Not for me it doesn't, he muttered. Medications? Yes, and therapy. Have you tried other medications and other therapy before? I had my pen ready to write. Many meds and many therapists, just like you, as well, and so far, no good, he replied. With one hand, I checked the paper on my desk at his background. Inside, it was a list of all his medical background and therapy and medication. And there was none. He'd had no trouble until this first appointment with me. His claim of no medical and therapeutic help was another fantasy and delusion, but for now I could go along with it to see if Jason would open up more toward our session. Did your previous therapists claim this as well? That these medications didn't work? I asked. Of course they did. I see. What? I was just saying, I understand. Okay. I wrote some more down on my paper. So tell me about this power. You said you can see things before they happen, I said, turning the subject back to Jason. He straightened up in his chair, his posture standing taller, flattening out his shirt and fixing his hair as if he was about to give a very important lecture. It started a couple months ago. I had a dream, and in the dream I saw a mug fall from a table in a kitchen. The mug shattered and blood washed out of it, mixing in along with the shattered glass. I woke up in a sweat, but thinking nothing of it. Then, a couple days later, I'm in the kitchen and my mom is washing dishes, and she sets a wet mug on the table counter. I remember my dream, but by the time I do, the mug falls, shattering on the floor. My mom hears this and sees the mess and goes to pick up the shards, and then she cuts an artery on her hand. The blood mixes with the shattered pieces. She almost bled to death before we could get her to the hospital. I wrote all of this down as he went, only sure to highlight the main points and plots of the story. I make a note to discuss this with his mother before they leave after the session, just to make sure if his story is accurate in its telling. What you're saying is that your dream predicted what happened that day? The day of the accident? I clarified. Not just this dream. Many of them. What? You've had multiple dreams where events have been predicted? Jason nodded. Do you want me to tell another dream? Jason asked. It's entirely up to you, Jason, I replied. Do you? I looked at him. This is your time. You can choose whatever you wish to talk about, I explained. I know, I'm not stupid, he replied. I know you aren't. How? I looked at him and he shrugged his shoulders. you don't believe me, Jason said. I never said that, I assured him. I can tell. I nodded. I'll tell another, he decided. Okay, I said. Jason squinted at me and rubbed his hands on his pants and started to talk again. In this other dream, I'm inside a garage somewhere, and there's a chair in the center of the garage, and it is all surrounded by this lawn equipment. In the chair, there is someone sitting, and it looks as if it's a child. I try to move the chair, but I find I can't move at all, and I see that in the figure's hand, there is a shotgun, and I watch as the figure slowly puts the shotgun up to the chin and pulls the trigger, and brains and blood shatter up against the ceiling and all over me as well. Then, I wake up, he said quietly, saying nothing else. A sudden sense of anxiety started to flow over me, and I felt clammy and unkempt. Waves of heat washed over me, and I'd started to feel sick. There was something in the room that was warming up, building up. An urge to stand and leave overcame me for a second. I considered taking the trip to the restroom to get myself together, although I decided against it entirely. I became anxious to finish the therapy session and to get on with my day. That sounds very serious, Jason, is all I managed to say, and I wrote the dream down as much as I could remember. Do you have a wife? Jason asked. I stopped and looked up at him. What's that? I asked, but I heard him the first time. You have a wife, Jason repeated, and he nodded to my finger, a gold ring enclosed around. I do, I replied. A child? A son. He's 8. That's good. Jason smiles, and I took a deep breath and relaxed. I was unaware of how tense I'd become under all his questioning. I started to think that this might be more serious than I'd previously thought. That was when I remembered that I hadn't finished with Jason's second dream. So, what happened? I asked. What do you mean? I poised the pen at him. The child in your dream. He died by gunshot from what I'm interpreting, I specified. Jason smiled at me. Go on, he said. It was as if he were the therapist now, and I the patient. Did anything happen, Jason? I asked quietly. He looked at me and leaned forward toward me, with his palms on his knees, like he might be sick. A couple days later, a friend of mine, this girl, is all upset and crying. She hadn't been to school in a few days. I'm her friend, so I ask her what's going on, and that's when she tells me that a younger brother had died in some sort of accident. I pressed on, and she says that he died because he'd gotten his dad's gun out of the closet and fiddled with it, and had shot himself by accident. I listened to his story, and it took me a moment to write all of it down. The thought that maybe Jason was right about the condition and that it was real passed by me, but I shook it away as soon as it came. No one can see the future, let alone in their dreams. But the way Jason looked at me, the way he told his dreams in that dull, emotionless, monotone and yet vividness, how real it sounded. I shook my head again. Then it also occurred to me that Jason could be lying about all of this. There had to be a reason why, though. There was no other explanation except the impossible. Jason, can I ask you a question? I asked. You just did, he replied. I smiled wanly, but I didn't feel confident. I still had that awful dread that there was some power he had over me, a power I couldn't quite see. Jason smiled at me, and then he said, I'm joking, go ahead. It was as if I was waiting for his permission. Are you lying to me about these dreams that happen in real life? Jason's face darkened, and then it went away, and he smiled at me and chuckled. I wouldn't be here if I wanted to lie, Jason said. I know, I just had to ask you because I'm certain you know that all of this, and what you've told me, sounds pretty unbelievable, does it not? All of the dreams predicting the future. Things like this don't happen in real life, Jason. It's impossible, I said. He stared at me, studying me. You don't believe me, he whispered. I took a deep breath. I just want you to be honest, I replied. What if I told you that I am being honest, that all these things did really happen? Would you call me crazy? Would you think of me as the rest? He asked. Of course not. What do you mean by the rest? Jason was quiet. What would you call me? He asked again. I wouldn't call you anything, I said. Really? Yes. He looked at me and smiled, and then leaned back in the office couch. He kept looking at me. When I was young, I used to have nightmares. Did you know that? He asked. I began to write. No, I didn't, I replied. What I have aren't nightmares. They're real, and they happen. This fabric of reality around you and I in this room is the only thing that keeps us here together, yet separate at the same time. Only the dreams I have are able to break that reality. If only you could see these dreams, to experience it. Would your reality break? Jason said, and he stared at me still, his eyes emotionless, blank. A sense of dread began to fill me like nothing had ever before, as if a bucket of warm, brown blood had been poised over my head and poured inside me, filling up my arms and legs and eyes and head. What are you saying? I whispered. I don't know. What am I saying, Doctor? I stared at him. Jason sighed. The only way you would be able to understand what my dreams are like is if you experienced it yourself, or if you were part of it somehow. You're still in denial. You think I'm lying, that all these dreams don't exist. That's the fabric of this reality, your unwillingness to believe, Jason said. You're saying I'm the one who is delusional, and that the only way to break it is to understand and experience your dreams, I asked. He pointed at me. Precisely, he said. Well, I'm afraid that's impossible, I added. How so? I can't experience the dreams you have. But I've told you them. You just have to believe. I'm a therapist, not a dream interpreter. And then he leaned forward, and he looked over at my desk. He studied the pictures I had sitting there, a dozen or so, all neatly placed. I had them there like any man with an office would. I was a good man. I never did anything wrong. That's your family, Jason said, nodding at the pictures. I glanced back at the pictures, my sense of dread still tingling. It is, I replied. Your wife and your boy? Correct. You said he was 8, turning 9 next week. What's his name? I paused for a moment. Braden, I lied. It was the only lie I told him throughout the session. Jason laughed as if he knew, and then he quieted again, as if there was something else on his mind he wanted to tell me. This was only our first session, but I felt like I could point out every small detail about him, even though I barely knew him. Maybe that scared me, and maybe that didn't. Maybe I saw what was coming and knew what was going to happen, and I let it. Maybe. Sometimes I just don't know. That's a nice name, Jason replied. We thought so, I added. You love him, don't you? Braden? And your wife, of course, Jason said. A flash of anger rose up in me, making me think he had done something to harm them, but it went away. I wasn't being rational. Something was happening. What's that supposed to mean? I asked softly. I had one more dream, Doctor. Just one. Jason raised his voice up above mine, and he leaned forward off the couch, but enough to stay seated. I looked at him, and he looked back. Care to tell me? I asked. I put my pen and paper down and leaned forward, waiting. Jason smiled. I'm inside a car on the highway. I'm sitting in the back of the car, and I can only look ahead of me and not to the sides or back. It is very quiet, and I can't tell if it's light or dark outside. It's hard to tell. But from what I can see ahead of me is a young boy in a car seat, sitting down in his booster chair, and ahead of him is a young woman, who I can only assume is his mother. I watch the both of them as they wait in this car. And then, out of nowhere, I hear a sort of screeching, and I black in and out, and then I'm on the ground outside on the road. I look to the side finally, and see a shredded car with broken glass all over the place, and all across it I can see blood and other types of matter I care not to describe. I see this, and then I hear the screeching of the mother, like a siren, like the sounds you'd hear when no God existed. My heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I wake up. He finished abruptly. He stared at me, and his mouth turned into a frown as he watched me closely. I think the boy got hurt. Really bad, he said. You didn't see them in your dream? I asked. He shook his head. I should have seen it coming. Maybe I did. When was this dream? I asked. Jason rubbed his hands and swallowed. I told you, a couple days ago, he said. I looked at my watch and saw that it's almost 8 o'clock in the morning. My wife and son should have been headed to school by then, so she could drop him off. I thought for a moment that maybe my son would have a good day at school and my wife a good day at work. I imagined that when I got home later that night, I'd kiss them and hold them and love them and cherish them. Then those thoughts went away, and I remembered Jason's dream, his nightmare, his vision. My phone started to ring, and I took it out of my pocket, and it was my wife. I thought that maybe it was a good thing that she was calling, that she was going to wish me a good day at work, and that I would say the same to her, that everything would be fine, that maybe I still had a chance, that nothing had ever happened. I let it ring, not answering. Jason stared at me, and I looked up, staring back. And the phone rang, and rang, and rang, and rang.
A few years back, I had the worst streak of bad luck in my entire life. My dad, my one living parent, got run over at a pedestrian crossing. My fiancée left me. I lost my job at the warehouse and had to move to the outskirts of town because of a sudden rent spike. My one stroke of good luck was my friend Gareth. He mainly worked the commissionary at a nearby prison and told me they were looking for more people, mainly night crew, but the pay was solid. There was a trial period and 2 weeks of on-the-job learning, but it was all paid for. In my position, how could I say no? So I started my job as a corrections officer just outside of Tomskog, Minnesota. The place was partly owned by a private company, but it was basically the same logo you'd see all over town. Hatchet Farmer has a finger in everything around here. I got the uniform, I met the inmates, I went through the routine, and I got to know who to keep my eyes on. I had to fire my taser after 3 weeks on the job, but that was pretty much the highlight. Most of the time is just sitting around waiting for something to happen, or breaking up loud conversations. It's not as dramatic as it sounds, but you gotta be ready for when it counts. In December of 2021, I was assigned to a new route. One of the people working with inmates in solitary confinement had to quit over a health scare, and I was next in line to take his place. It was still a night gig, but in a deeply disturbing part of the jail. Now, I won't paint it to be something it's not. Isolation is just a whole bunch of people keeping to themselves, usually not even that many. Sure, the Tom Skog facility has a slightly higher solitary capacity than normal, but we're talking 10 to 20% at most. Still, you need someone there at all times. You never know what they can come up with, and they're trickier than they look. There was this one guy at the end of the hall that just gave me the creeps. The other guards called him Mary, short for a longer biblical name I could never remember. He always broke the lights in his cell, and he was rumoured to be extremely violent. Even in solitary confinement, he had to wear shackles. Every time he received his food, he had to put his hands out to have the shackles removed so he could eat. That's basically the only part of him I ever saw. His hands. The cell was always pitch black. The guy used to be an academic. Mary had 3 doctorates, but one day, he just snapped. Killed 3 of his students. He also had some kind of chemical burn on his arms, leaving most of the skin on his hands discolored. Silver poisoning, possibly. Even his files were strange, stamped with a sort of blue flower. Most inmates had a stamp on their file, but he was the only one with a sunflower. The guy refused to eat during the day, so I was the one to feed him on the night shift. Every time I removed those shackles, I'd see those gnarled blue hands reach for me, or the tray, whichever. One of those nights, we were having beef stew. Nothing fancy to look at, but the thing smelled divine. I brought him some bread on the side, a little jello box, and a bottle of water. Everyone else was fast asleep, apart from a newbie who couldn't stop crying at the end of the corridor. Same procedure as last time, I said, hands up front. Those elongated fingers slowly slid out, as if giving me an invisible fruit. The shackles clattered. I put down the tray, got the keys, and started twisting the locks back and forth. These were always a pain to deal with. "You're going to let me out," Mary said. "I need you to, so you're going to." "Yeah, I don't see that happening, buddy." I unlocked his shackles and fetched his tray. He took it, but lingered for a second. "You're going to," he said, with no hint of a joke. "It's already decided." "Well, no one showed me that memo," I chuckled. "You good in there?" "Someone said bad things happen to you," Mary said, "and that's why you're here." "Well, that makes 2 of us. Have a nice dinner." I walked away, but couldn't help but to look back as those long fingers slid back inside the dark room. Gave me the creeps every time. And sure, I had to get the tray and cuffs back up in a bit, but that was just part of the job. The next night was fish sticks. Not too shabby, but far from fresh. There were only 3 people in solitary that night. 2 guys who tried to kill each other. And Mary. Always Mary. As soon as I approached, those blue hands slid back out. I had to look away. There was something about the texture of his hands that made me feel weird, like they were always a bit too slick, like a thin cover of soap. This time, he didn't skip a beat. "You're going to let me out," he said. "It's already decided. You keep saying it, but this door just seems as sturdy today as it did yesterday. If you come in, you'll see why you're going to let me out." "You mean, if I open this door without any kind of backup or supervision? Yeah, I got a pretty good idea why you'd get out if I did." "That's not it." I unlocked his shackles and he took his tray. It disappeared into the darkness, but Mary kept talking. "You being here is proof that I made it," he said, "that I'll get out." "I'm not following." "They told me you lost a lot of things. Your dad, your girl, your apartment." There was poison in his words. Deep, seething poison. I'll be honest, I wanted to break his goddamn hands when he said it. But what bothered me more was where he'd heard it from. There was no one around to talk to him, and as a rule, we didn't talk to inmates about our personal lives, neither our own nor that of other employees. Someone must have slipped. "Look, that's personal," I said. "That's none of your business." "Then, how do I know your dad got hit by a white Corolla?" I banged on the door. I didn't even know why. It was just this instinctual reaction to shut him up. But of course, that just made him laugh. How the hell did he know? It had been a hit and run, and the color of the car was only a footnote in the police report. "That's not funny," I spat, "and you're not making any new friends by being an asshole." "I don't care, little man," he continued, "because you're going to let me out. Not on my goddamn life." I took the tray back from him before he finished his dinner, and I shackled him right back up. He didn't resist. It shut him up for a while, but it was a faint victory. I asked to be transferred to another shift, but there just wasn't any other people available. Hiring was rough. We were basically on our own. If we lost one person to sickness, we'd be out of luck at that point. So no, there was no option to switch. It couldn't be done. I didn't want to go back to Mary. I really didn't. I didn't know who was talking to him, and I didn't like what he was saying. I checked and double-checked, and there was no mistaking that white Corolla. It had gone 60 on a 30-mile-per-hour street and killed him on impact, before disappearing down a dirt road. The thing was just gone. The police said it might have been deliberate, that it was too fast to be an accident, and in my mind's eye, I could see blue hands on the steering wheel. When I walked up to Mary's cell with a tray of meatballs and mashed potatoes, I was genuinely scared of what he might say. Every word felt like a threat. Could he really say something to make me let him out? What if he could? What would it be? "Hands out," I said, knocking on his door. "You're not letting me out tonight," he sighed. "I know that, but it's gonna happen." Yeah, I shrugged. "That's all I want to do." "Did they tell you what I did? How I did it?" I got a pretty good picture. Helium poisoning. Painless asphyxiation. They didn't feel a thing. I didn't respond. I just took off his shackles and gave him the tray. "I'm not a monster, you know," he added. "I just do what I have to do." "Eat up and leave the tray," I said as I walked off. "Maybe ask your ex about Beverly," he shouted through the slit in the door. I could almost see his lips moving. "I'm sure you'll find it an illuminating conversation." I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't want to think about it. But god damn it, there was something there. In the last fight we'd had, she'd shouted that name. Beverly. I didn't know a Beverly, and at that moment I didn't care. But it was such a specific name. The chance that Mary just picked it up on random was improbable. So the next shift before my work, I decided to give my ex a call. Things had calmed down after all. There was a cold greeting and even colder small talk. Finally, she just called me out. "Just tell me what you want," she asked. I want to talk about Beverly, I said. You said her name once. What? You're getting remarried? Want to bury the hatchet? No, What? You want me to forgive you? Give you my blessing? What are you talking about? There was a moment of silence. She scoffed. The skank you're dating? I'm not dating Beverly, I said. Never have. Don't give me that. I saw your emails, her video, her Insta. Look, I don't know any Beverly. She screamed a username and cut the call. I got online and looked her up. Beverly was maybe 8 years younger than me, and absolutely stunning. She'd only been active for a few months, where she uploaded a sort of daily video blog. It was heartbreaking. In every post, she talked about the issues of being the other woman. A vlog kind of thing. Daily outfit posts, memes, a sort of strange mix. This is the woman she thought I'd been involved with, through some kind of email? It didn't make sense. And how the hell did Mary know about this? This haunted me. I didn't know what to think. And I felt myself coming back to Mary and his blue hands. I had this constant sense of him being with me, looking at me. It felt like I was missing something. I could feel that strange, slick texture as the hands wrapped around my neck whenever I let my mind wander. I could feel his presence in the back seat of my car, riding along with me. And once, at a stop sign, I heard him clear as day, right behind me. You're gonna let me out. But there was no one there. The next time I went back, I skipped the tray. We were gonna figure this out. I finished my coffee and thundered down the hall, ignoring the other inmates. Mary had some explaining to do, and I was goddamn terrified of what he was gonna say. But I needed to hear it. You're gonna tell me what you know right now, I said. I've had my black coffee and I'll break your goddamn hands. You let me out, and it'll all be clear, chuckled Mary. I promise. It's kind of written on the wall at this point. I smacked my nightstick against the door. No more games. Then come in. Teach me a lesson. Open the door. I calmed down. Maybe this was how he got to me. Tricking me. That wasn't gonna work. No way. Your shift starts at 10:15, Mary said. You take your black coffee and you came here first thing you did. Hold on. He shuffled off into the back of the cell. There was a strange scratching sound and he was gone for a solid minute. I just listened, trying to figure him out. I shone a flashlight inside, but he'd hung up a sheet over the slit in the door. I couldn't see anything without going inside. So, there was your dad. You reacted to that. Then a Beverly. That worked. What made you lose your last job? Was it? Let's say a failed drug test. Yeah, that'll work. What the hell are you talking about? And you don't do drugs? Probably some kind of error. Maybe a few. Poppy seed pastries for breakfast. Those things can give a false positive. I just stood there, mouth wide open. The morning of the mandatory drug test, I'd had 3 pastries with poppy seeds. The bakery down the street were giving them away as a promotional event. I got this awful pit in my stomach, like it knew more about me than I did. Like it was about to tell me something horrible. Like it was standing right behind me, just soaking up my fear. So what brought you here? I'll have to figure that out later. Maybe you know someone here, he continued. Shut up, I said, hitting the door. I'm telling you to shut up. I looked over my shoulder. There was no one else here. Why was I feeling watched? Calm down, Mary said. We're getting to the end. You're about to let me out. Never, I spat. You're gonna rot in here. Don't you understand? He yelled back. The fact that you're here proves that I'm right. How? How does that make any goddamn sense? And then he told me everything. Mary, or Meridian, was given an opportunity. If he followed a very specific set of events, he would be given a great gift. Non-locality, he said, but you need to dissociate hard enough. Basically turn yourself crazy enough for reality not to make sense anymore. Or rather, for you as a person not to make sense to reality. The other way around. As a part of this delusion, he killed 3 of his students. He burned himself with chemicals. Then seemingly, as part of his plan, he willingly went to jail. Years of darkness, he added. Isolation, like being in a sensory deprivation tank. I need it. I crave it. Then, I'm done. And all for what? To be unbound. No causality, no rules, non-linearity. And the fact that you're standing here is all the proof that I need to know that it's going to work. And why is that? Don't you get it? A blue hand slipped out of the slit in the door and pointed at me. I did all this to you. I put you here. Someday you will let me out, because if you didn't, I wouldn't get you to come here. And that time is drawing close. I don't need this darkness anymore. I feel it. I'm done. That's impossible, I said. That's literally impossible. Then why are you sliding down the wall? Feeling sleepy? I hadn't even noticed. I was nodding off right there in the hall. I tried to touch my face to see if I could feel anything. Did you? Yes, Mary said. I drugged you. I couldn't have if you hadn't told me about the black coffee. But now that you did, I could. It's all on the list, and what's on the list is going to happen. I don't understand. Imagine you could travel through time, he chuckled. Not today, but someday. And you promise yourself that you're going to put a rose outside your door on this very day, in this very present. And when you open your door, the rose is there. Then you would know that you're gonna get that power. You know that you will come here someday. Then it all comes down to strength of will, to force yourself to remember all that you're going to do, and in the correct order. That's not... An image flashed in my head. Blue hands on the steering wheel of a white Corolla, a man paying the bakery to promote some pastries, a woman being paid for a bit of internet theatre by an unknown benefactor. There were dozens of people standing at the end of the hallway. Thin, emaciated men with long fingers and blue hands. I blacked out. I woke up in the staff room with a nurse looking into my eyes. They gave me a checkup and sent me home to rest up. They gave me a few days off just to make sure. I didn't know what to say. I had my keys and Mary was still in his cell. If I was the one to let him out, all I had to do to make sure that didn't happen was to stay away. That'd ruin his plans. So, taking a few days off seemed perfectly fine. I was about to leave when Gareth met me in the parking lot. He jogged out to say goodnight and to see if I was okay. Look, he said, I know you hate that shift, but don't worry about it. They're moving him. I've heard talks about approving a shift change. It'll be someone else's problem, and you'll be back in cell block D. What do you mean? They heard how much he was messing with you. Gareth said, and decided it wasn't worth it. They're moving him. We can't lose you. What? Why? Gee, I thought this was good news. No, I don't know. Gareth patted me on my shoulder and sent me on my way. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain it? Did I even believe it? I got in my car and took a deep breath. A strange chemical smell. I noticed something on the passenger seat. A letter. I took a deep breath and opened it. "Thanks for the help," it said. "This one's on me." A little smiley face and a $100 bill. I just stared at it. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. For a heartbeat, all I could see were blue hands simultaneously smacking my car. I shot out the driver's seat, but there was no one outside, just an empty parking lot. Still, I couldn't help but feel watched. My pulse pounded behind my eyes, almost popping a blood vessel. They were out there. He was out there, watching me from the dark. He was still getting out. I knew he was all around me, unbound. He could stab me, push me over, whatever. He'd be there and then not, and I'd be helpless. I got this intense sense of paranoia washing over me, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I just dug my fingers into my hair, trying to force my mind out of that dark pit. This was my doing. I'd let him treat me like this, and because of it, they were going to move him. During that move, he'd get out. He must have planned it, and I couldn't do anything about it since I was off duty. I took another look at that $100 bill, and a thought occurred to me. There was something I could do. I went to the gas station. I came back the next day with a backpack. I showed my credentials and told the gatekeep that I was there to fetch something from my locker. It was fine. Danny knows me. I got in on the day shift and waved at the others. A few of them asked how I was doing, what I was doing, the regular chit-chat. All smiles and waves. Prison transfers take place in the early afternoon. It'll only be a short walk, but that might be all the time he needed to escape. I used my keys to get past cell block D. I knew I'd get stuck on a camera, but I also knew the prisoners were out in the yard. No one was watching the tapes, not this close to lunch. I walked straight into the solitary ward and all the way up to Mary's door. "Wait," he said. You're here?" "Yeah." "No, that doesn't make any sense." "Send me home then. Have someone shoot me. I'm waiting." "No, wait, that doesn't... Hold on." There was a shuffle as Mary hurried into the back of his cell. I couldn't feel them here. We were alone. I unzipped my backpack and took out a door stopper. I shoved it under the door. That thing wasn't moving anytime soon. I stepped over to the fire alarm and pulled the handle. The emergency doors opened with a violent, blaring siren. Every door swung open. But Mary's. I was lucky that time. No one in the solitary ward but Mary and I. "Hold on, what are you doing?" I took out one more thing from my backpack. A can of gasoline. I shoved it through the slit in the door, tearing down the sheet he'd hung up. "Oh, you're killing me. That's what this is." Yeah, and I see no little blue hands trying to stop me, so I guess it's working. Maybe you're missing the point. Maybe you're not doing what you're supposed to. And how exactly is that a bad thing? It keeps you from getting out. Half a can was enough. It was leaking under the door. I took out a gasoline-soaked rag, lit it on fire, and tossed it through the slit. For a split second, the room lit up. The walls, the bed, even Mary. I got a short view of the room as it was, and what he was doing in there. He had drawn things on the wall and the floor. White Corolla, Beverly, poppy seeds, black coffee. The wall was full of things, arrows, lines and squares, all related to me. These were all things he was gonna do when he got out, and he was so convinced that I was the one to let him out, so convinced that it had all started to happen. And then there was Merry himself. He was more bone than man, sunken eyes like he hadn't slept for weeks. He had torn his hair out and bit off his fingernails. This was a completely senseless man, and he stared at me with unblinking eyes. But in that moment, as the flames started to lick him and the fire spread into the hallway, he looked me in the eyes and smiled. I just bolted out of there. Hundreds of inmates were gathering in the yard, and I could already hear sirens. I could see flames bursting out of the solitary ward. Before the firefighters could get there, one of the walls completely collapsed. And I saw him, just for a brief second. I saw that emaciated man standing in the flames, holding his hands out like he was receiving a gift. The chemicals in his arms ignited with a bright green, and they burned straight through the wall. And the thought hit me. Technically, he was out. He might be on fire, but he was out. And in that split second, in that heartbeat, like snuffing out a candle. Hours later, the fire was put out. It didn't spread. Turns out that part of the jail had a peculiar type of stone that was weak to high temperatures. The stonework just crumbled. Some kind of exposure to a certain chemical. A blue one with a green flame. The construction crew had cheaped out on materials many years ago. There were no records. They'd forgotten to change the tapes from last night. There were no visitors' logs. Barely anyone remembered me even being there. And lastly, there was no body recovered in that cell. As I got back in my car, I just held my breath, waiting for something to happen. A knife at my throat. Possibilities passed through my mind. In another place, it all really happened. Violent images of myself getting stabbed, burned, tortured and flayed. A world where everyone turned to ash. And I was placed in front of a throne of bone as a prized jester. Dark figures rising from the earth, tearing the world apart, breaking the ground like an eggshell. I cried. It was seconds away at most. But minutes passed. I found a letter on the passenger seat. It hadn't been there 3 seconds ago. It took me a solid 15 minutes to work up the courage to open it. "You got me out," it said with a smiley face. And there was another $100 bill. Since I was a kid, my great-uncle Ivan lived with us in our basement. He's a surrealist painter by trade, and his works are beautifully done, whimsical and thought-provoking oil masterpieces worthy of being stared at for hours. Each time I look at one of his paintings, I find something new that I'd never noticed before. Uncle Ivan is the most talented artist I had ever met, and yet his work is not even known to the most obscure collectors. I wonder sometimes if he'll be like Van Gogh, and nobody will know properly of his genius until after he's gone. When he had a stroke and lost the ability to speak, he began painting obsessively, showing the world the beauty in his mind which would otherwise be lost without words. My parents built him a studio in the backyard for his 70th birthday. They have friends in construction, and we have a large property in the country, so they built him a very big studio with high ceilings, knowing that he would find a way to utilize every inch available. And utilize he did. The walls were painted white with primer, and then he set himself to work. Inside the massive space, he created another world. Within a year, his designs were outlined in black and white, with splashes of colour being applied in places. Already, the overall effect was astonishing. It was like entering the surreal space of his own mind, an Alice in Wonderland world that sparked the imagination and resembled the uncanny landscape of dreams long forgotten. It was when the colours were completely filled in that the illusion became complete. And one day, I went outside to his workspace in the backyard to find that he had vanished. He was gone, and I could make no sense of it. "Uncle Ivan?" I called out in the empty, echoing studio, but he didn't answer. I gazed around in total wonderment at the huge room he had painted once again. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, alive with colours and images. I tried to find a spot of black and white where he still had to fill in colour and could find none. The field of mushrooms with its gnome inhabitants was so real it felt like I could step into it and join the merriment of the fairy folks living there. Purple Cloud Mountains rose up steeply to the left of that, a field of pink cherry blossom trees sloping downward on the other side towards a tumbling river the colour of cotton candy. This led into a sprawling desertscape which started out in yellows, oranges and golds and faded softly into the greens and gentle blues of an ocean filled with kelp, octopus, jellyfish, and a myriad of other fantastical aquatic creatures. Gasping, I realized the room was finally complete. My heart thumped in my chest as I thought about what this meant. This had been my Uncle Ivan's life for the past several years. Now it was finished, and he could have been reveling in his masterpiece. I thought he would have at least come to find me, to show me that it was done. He knew I was his biggest fan after all. Where was he? The man was a total recluse, a hermit. He never left the property, no matter what, and often spent days straight in his studio, working on the all-encompassing mural. I walked around the fantastical space, becoming lost in the swirling colours and dreamlike images. Even the floors were painted, making it feel like you were completely immersed in the beautiful fantasy world my uncle had made. A sound of birds chirping came from nearby, and I looked up with surprise, wondering how they could have gotten into the workshop. When I gazed up and looked around, my heart skipped a beat, and then another. My knees buckled and I sat down hard, my jaw snapping shut with the impact. Dew-moist grass was beneath me, despite never having left the studio. Strangely, the grass was crimson red, the colour of fresh blood. Insects I didn't recognise were scurrying in it, crawling up my arm. They were colourful and otherworldly, leaving rainbow-patterned footprints in their wake. The field of towering mushrooms stood in front of me, and he was actually there. It wasn't just an illusion of perspective and artistic mastery anymore. I could feel the fresh air on my face and heard birds chirping all around me. There was the sound of a flute playing in the distance ahead, and gnomes were dancing merrily and singing beneath the shade of mushroom-capped roofs. Purple clouds floated in the sky, and a giant eyeball looked down at me like the moon, winking when it saw me. Too scared to scream, I began breathing heavily. Terrified, my eyes started to search for an exit, but found no way out. "It's beautiful here, isn't it?" a voice asked from nearby. It sounded familiar, but I couldn't place where I had heard it before. "I thought you'd like it," my great Uncle Ivan said, reaching out his hand to help me to my feet. "Most people didn't understand what I was doing out here, but I could see that you got it from the very beginning. You knew what the purpose of it all was." Standing to my feet, my terror began to evaporate, and I felt a smile spread across my face, despite the surreal situation I'd found myself in. "Uncle Ivan, you can talk." It had been so many years since I heard the old man's voice, I'd forgotten what it sounded like. "I can," he said, looking pleased. "At least while I'm here. But that's always been the case. Come on, let's go for a walk." We started ambling towards the mushroom village up ahead. The music of lutes and flutes and drums became louder, the gentle tones of singing voices rising up to greet us. "I miss talking to you, Uncle Ivan," I said after a minute of silent walking. "That's funny. We haven't really said anything yet." We both chuckled at that. "Well, it's hard to find someone you're just as comfortable being quiet around as you are talking. And to be honest, I'm not really sure what to say after seeing all this. How long have you been coming to this place?" "Off and on for about a year. It was more off than on at first. Every time I came across a patch of black and white, it brought me out of it again. But the more I filled in, the longer I got to stay." I thought about this for a minute. "It's all the way filled in now. Does that mean—" Before I could finish my thought, he interrupted, pointing up at the sky and putting his arm around me. "Look, Jordan, it's the spectral dragon. That's what I've been calling it anyway." A creature came up over the purple cloud mountains like the sunrise, and then came crashing down on the hills towards us, sending a flurry of cherry blossoms fluttering into the air like butterflies. The dragon reminded me of a kaleidoscope as it morphed into every colour of the rainbow before rising up on an air current at the last possible moment, narrowly avoiding crashing into the mushroom forest below. Its long, snaking body extended for miles and was soon lost above us in the clouds. A few moments later, the skyward cherry blossoms fell around us like snow and continued in that way for a while afterwards, until the ground was pink with them. We kicked them up into the air with our feet as we walked, like fallen leaves in autumn. The gnomes didn't even interrupt their song, as if such things were an everyday occurrence, and I realized they probably were. "This place is incredible," I said. "No wonder you've been spending so much time out here." Uncle Ivan was smiling and nodding, seeing that I understood him even more now. But there was something off about him. He had lost weight. His face looked skeletal and thin. The change had been so slow I barely noticed, since I came out to his workshop pretty much every day. But he previously had chubby cheeks and a belly which overhung his belt. Now those things were gone, and he appeared gaunt and pale. "Come on, I'll show you my house," he said, laughing and taking my hand. "Your house?" He led me up the slope towards the mushroom village. The stalks of the fungi had windows and doors carved into them with care, and the quaint community reminded me of the downtown of a small medieval village. There were rustic shops with tables out front, a blacksmith, and a market stall with fruits and vegetables. Gnomes were going about their lives in harmony and happiness. "In here," Uncle Ivan said, opening the squeaky door at the base of one mushroom. He ducked his head and went inside through the low entryway, and I followed after him. Once inside, I saw a tastefully decorated room with furnishings in purple, orange, and gold. There was no indication we were inside a mushroom, It just looked like a regular house, only circular instead of square. He went over to a large cabinet and began to pull things from his pockets, shoving them inside the drawers. "Just a minute, let me get organized," Uncle Ivan said. He took a large horn beetle from one pocket of his bathrobe and stuffed it into a drawer, then started searching through the other drawers for something. I saw a purple octopus poke his head out of one, and he crammed it back inside. Another drawer sounded like it contained a swarm of bees, while another made a sound like a train whistle and the roar of a locomotive coming down the tracks. Uncle Ivan slammed that one shut quickly as the chugging, rattling noise of an approaching train became so loud it threatened to burst an eardrum. He breathed a sigh of relief, then opened the bottom drawer, retrieved a polka dot umbrella and unfurled it. A dozen or so frogs fell out from the folds and began hopping around on the floor, but he ignored them. "Okay, all set. How about some breakfast?" The two of us set out on the town and met gnomes on the way to a tea shop. They were singing Uncle Ivan's praises, literally. They had written several songs about him. Most seemed to proclaim him as a savior and a hero, vanquishing an evil enemy which came in the night. "What's with the creepy songs?" I asked him as we took a seat at a table outside the tea shop. "They kept talking about a monster coming in the night. That's not real, is it? I mean, I thought this place was all about peace and beauty." "You can't have good without evil," my Uncle Ivan said, raising his hand to call over a gnome waiter. "Yin and yang, you need one to have the other. This place couldn't be what it is without an evil underbelly. For heaven to exist, there must be hell after all." Our waiter quickly poured our tea, then hustled away, his eyes fearful and his hands shaking as he overheard our conversation. Another member of the waitstaff brought a platter of biscuits and cakes, then hurried off as well, looking similarly frightened by the subjects we were talking about. "Does it always come at night? The monster in the songs?" "Always. But it's okay. I know how to take care of it. I always protect the villagers here. They need me to protect them. I'm their savior." His eyes looked to be gazing far into the distance past me, and I was suddenly worried again for my Uncle Ivan. I took a sip of the tea, but it did not quench my thirst. I ate one of the cookies as well, but felt no less hungry afterwards. My uncle ignored all the items in front of us, choosing instead to stare off in the distance, and once again I remarked to myself how thin he looked, how unwell. Despite the beauty of his creation, despite the absolutely unremarkable nature of it all, I was suddenly feeling scared. Not just for my uncle, but for me. I wanted to go home. I wanted to get out of this place. Opening my mouth to speak these thoughts aloud, it suddenly grew dark in the mushroom village and the surrounding fungi forest. A huge black cloud, filled with booming thunder, was rolling over us, and rain began to pour down, drenching us immediately. Gnomes ran into their houses and slammed the doors and windows closed. Open signs were pulled down from shop windows, and one saying closed replaced them. And yet still, my Uncle Ivan stared off into the distance. "Uncle Ivan?" I said, grabbing his shoulder and squeezing it. "Uncle Ivan, are you there?" My heart started pounding faster as his glazed eyes remained fixed on some invisible object in the distance. For a second, I thought he would stay like that forever, but then he blinked and focused on me again. "Oh, sorry, I must have been lost in my thoughts." He looked around and saw the darkness and the rain and stood up quickly. "Dear, oh dear, we should go. Quickly now. Come on, let's get back to the house before it's too late." I thought at first he was talking about going back to the real world and nearly jumped for joy. I followed after him in the pounding rain and splashed through mud puddles as he led me back to his safe house inside the mushroom. It was only once we were inside that I heard the sounds coming from nearby, growing louder and more distinct. It sounded like the floor-shaking approach of a bear or a lion stalking towards us. My uncle grabbed a large wooden plank from behind the couch and brought it over to the door quickly, his eyes wide and fearful. "Help me with this, quickly. They'll be here any second." I hesitated, feeling as if something about this was wrong. But then my fear overtook, and I grabbed the other end of the wooden board and helped him lay it across the doorway, barricading it. A second later, the door began to pound and shake as something tried to force its way in from outside. It sounded like claws raking across the wood as the thing roared and banged against the entry with all its might. "What the hell is that thing?" I asked my uncle. He was too busy to answer, searching through his large dresser with his countless tiny drawers. "Where is it? Where is it?" he shouted, pulling one open after another. "It has to be here. It has to be." I ran over to him, looking back over my shoulder at the door as it nearly broke in two with the repeated impacts from outside. Now it sounded like not just one creature, but several, their claws tearing through the wood like paper. "Uncle Ivan, we have to get out of here. They're gonna get us." As he pulled open one drawer after another, I saw horrors inside each that I would never forget. The dresser had been full of fun and whimsical items from what I'd seen before, but now every drawer he opened had a nightmare inside. A hooded figure reached out with a skeletal arm, a scythe gripped in his bony fist. My uncle slammed the drawer shut before it could emerge. The next had a freakish monster with bulging eyes and squid-like tentacles, which snapped in the air and hissed with a beaked mouth full of many sharp teeth. He closed that drawer hastily as well. The door we had barricaded shut began to splinter, and I could see forms through the growing cracks in the wood. It seemed as if one more impact would break it open, and we would be murdered by whatever came inside to greet us. All darkness, fangs, and claws by the looks of it. My uncle finally found what he was looking for and pulled it out from the dresser drawer, shouting in triumph. "Yes, I found it. Let's get the hell out of here." It was a paintbrush and a palette. He began to paint a picture on the wall beside him, working so quickly it didn't seem possible. A few moments after he had begun, there was a beautiful doorway with a blue sky and sunshine. There were trees and green grassy fields rolling into the distance. "Come on, through here," he said, grabbing my arm. I didn't move though. Something about all of this was wrong, I thought to myself again. Uncle Ivan needed my help, and this wasn't the way to help him. Escaping further into his fantasy world, going one step deeper into this dimension, or whatever this was not going to help him. I studied his bony face and looked at his thin, frail hand reaching out to take mine. "Come on, what are you waiting for?" he asked, looking terrified, checking over my shoulder for the next impact from outside. "This isn't the way, Uncle Ivan," I said, realizing what I meant when I said it. "That's not the way home. And I need to take you home. You need to eat and drink, and you need to get out of this place for a little while. You can't survive here. You can't live inside this world you created, or it'll kill you." "What? No, I can't leave. This is my home now. I need to protect it." The door splintered further with another loud bang as the dark forms forced their weight against the threshold. "Do you know what's on the other side of that door, Uncle Ivan? Have you ever waited to see what will come through? Or do you just escape further into your fantasies and run away every time?" He hesitated, looking as if he might just jump through the doorway without me, escaping into that other world never to be seen again. But then he turned to look at me and let out a deep, shuddering breath. "No, I've always run away from it. I suppose I should look at it though, shouldn't I? We all need to face our fears sometimes, Uncle Ivan," I said, taking his hand. "We'll face it together, whatever it is." He gripped my hand tightly, and we stood, waiting for our demise, or for whatever would come next. With a loud crash, the door broke open, and dark forms in the shape of every alpha predator began to squeeze through, looking like oversized, nightmarish images of their true selves. Shadowy bodies with no discernible features except for their teeth. Their teeth, which were too long and too sharp, gleaming white. As they closed in on us, I focused on that lack of colour and remembered those blank spots in the mural. I thought about home. I braced for the impact and for the teeth which would tear me to shreds. But they never came. When I opened my eyes and looked up, I saw a wall in front of me with a wolf painted in black and white. It hadn't been filled in yet. A ray of sunshine was peeking in through the doorway which led outside, and I could hear birds chirping out there. We were back in my great-uncle's studio again, and he was beside me, holding my hand, squeezing it very tightly. Both of us let go at the same time, looking at each other and feeling slightly embarrassed for some reason, as if what had just happened hadn't really happened. "Looks like you missed the spot after all," I said to my uncle. He looked back at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. He wanted to say something back, but couldn't. Instead, he picked up his paintbrush, which was sitting nearby with a palette. Various colours were on the board, waiting to be chosen to fill in the empty spots, to make the mural really, truly complete. My uncle went over to the spot with his paintbrush in hand, looking ready to fill in the emptiness. As he picked up the brush, his hand started to shake. Maybe from hunger, maybe from something else. I laid a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. "Why don't you take a break for a little while, Uncle Ivan? Let's go inside and grab a bite to eat. The mural will still be here tomorrow." He turned to look at me and smiled, then set the paintbrush and palette down on the floor. Putting his arm around my shoulder, the two of us walked out from the paint fumes and into the fresh air of the backyard. "You know," I said, "I was kind of bummed out when I thought the mural was finished. This project has been such a big part of both our lives the last few years. Maybe you should just leave that one spot blank, like a signature, a reminder of all the time and effort you put in here in the real world." He nodded, his eyes focused and lucid for the first time since I'd seen him that day. Uncle Ivan pointed at a large mountain off in the distance. It took me a second to understand, but I'd always been able to see what he meant in these muted moments, and I did then too. Yeah, like a landmark, so no matter what, you can always find your way home. I've been surrounded by conspiracy theories my whole life. I don't mean that I believe in them. Most of them are ridiculous. Some of them are dangerous. I only ever got into that stuff because of my uncle. When you grow up visiting a man who owns more black and white photocopies of underground base schematics than he does shirts, it starts to rub off on you. I never cared much about Bigfoot, but mole people and pigeon robots, it was interesting to listen to. My Uncle Warren was that relative, the one everyone keeps at arm's length during the holidays, the one people warn their kids about before they visit. He didn't do anything wrong, not ever, but there was always something about him that made others uncomfortable. He had a disorder. It had warped his jaw since birth. His teeth jutted out at an angle like a row of warped fence posts. He had to wear these weird rubber mouth guards at night just to stop them from cutting into his cheeks. He also had diabetes, and that was a constant battle for him. He kept sugar tabs in his shirt pocket and always smelled of insulin and peanut butter crackers. He wore shirts that had been washed until the graphics faded into pale ghosts, jeans with cracked belt loops, and a windbreaker that had probably been navy blue 20 years ago. His glasses were too large for his face. His hair had receded before I was even born. Most people didn't give him a second chance. The ones who did usually looked away. But to me, he was great. He wasn't just a family weirdo. He was brilliant. He knew how to fix things, build things, explain things. He could talk about subsonic weapons and hollow earth theories in the same breath he walked me through fixing a blown capacitor. He was patient. He had time for me. I didn't get that from many people growing up. His house felt like some kind of time capsule. Old wallpaper, flickering fluorescent lights, carpet that had gone stiff at the edges. But what always pulled me in was the back room. He called it his workshop. No one else ever went back there. I think my mom saw it once and refused to step inside again. It was cramped and packed wall to wall with shelves full of scrap parts, tools, plastic tubs, and printouts that had yellowed into brittle curls. It had cathode monitors stacked on top of filing cabinets, each one hooked into something different. One of them looped footage from a cave in Turkey, another displayed seismic readouts. I'd sit at his workbench while he soldered or rewired something. The smell of burned plastic and machine oil always stuck to my clothes after I left. He had this Motorola flip phone with a thick black antenna. He clipped it to his belt like it was a badge. I once asked him why he didn't just get a smartphone, and he looked at me like I had asked him to put a tracking device in his skull. The only thing about him that I found strange was his obsession with mole people. He didn't picture them as cartoonish or green or wearing goggles. He imagined them as pale, sightless things, humanoid, but not entirely human, adapted to a place where light never touched. He had theories about how their society worked, what tools they used, how they might hear our movement from beneath the crust and respond with coded vibrations. He rarely even wanted to use light outside of his home, and that really shined through the time I went camping with him. I tried to set up a fire. I had gathered kindling, stacked it carefully, even brought a fire starter cube because I was proud of thinking ahead. He stopped me the moment I could light it. He didn't yell. He just stared at the pile for a long moment, then told me, gently, to leave it alone. He said fire draws attention. He said some things can't handle sudden brightness, that it confuses them, hurts them, that when you're near their domain, you should respect their rules. I didn't understand at all, but I just let it go. Months passed after that. We fell out of touch for a while. I got busy. Life crept in as it does, slowly at first, then all at once. When you start working full-time, checking in on your eccentric uncle doesn't always top the list. But I still thought about him, especially when I saw something odd on TV or read a weird headline online. I always think, Warren would have something to say about that. Then, one day, I heard from my mom that he was gone. She said it offhand, like it wasn't worth more than a sentence. "Oh, by the way, your uncle hasn't been home in weeks. Your cousin Todd went to check. He wasn't there." That was it. No missing person flyers or searches. Just a call to the authorities and a casual shrug passed around the family group chat. Everyone had an explanation ready. He'd probably gone off chasing one of these rabbit holes, He did that once years ago. Spent 3 weeks in New Mexico because he thought the government was digging under old reservations. Turned out he just wanted to try desert photography. But even then, he told me before he went. Todd had apparently driven over, walked around the house once, tried the door, peered through the blinds, then left. Said everything looked fine. That was enough for them. But something about it sat wrong with me. I couldn't explain it. I hadn't seen him in months, and I had no reason to assume the worst. But I knew him. He wouldn't vanish for weeks without at least leaving a note taped to the door or a voicemail filled with static and obscure hints. He was weird, not careless. So I went. I didn't tell anyone. I got in my car early one morning and drove out to his place. The further I got, the heavier it felt. When I pulled up to the house, it looked the same as always. I went up to the mailbox to retrieve the spare key. Uncle had told me about where he kept it, in case I need to grab something from his workshop when he's sleeping or away. His car was parked in the driveway, right where it always sat, but the porch light bulb had burned out. I noticed that as I climbed the steps. A tiny bulb, dead and cold in its fixture. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. I moved through the living room slowly. My shoes made no sound on the old carpet. Something in me didn't want to break whatever spell was holding the place in suspension. I stepped into the kitchen. That's when I saw his medication. It sat in its organizer on the counter, color-coded, labeled by day, Sunday through Saturday. Each compartment still full. His blood sugar monitor was next to it, turned off. The testing strips were still sealed. I stared at it for a while. My uncle had never missed a dose in his life. He treated his condition with an almost ritualistic precision. It had been drilled into him. Skipping insulin wasn't just irresponsible. It could kill him. I followed the faint electric buzz toward the back of the house, a sound I knew well. It was always there when I visited. The workshop ran on its own circuit, something he wired himself. Even when he wasn't home, he left certain things running. The world doesn't pause just because I step out, he used to say. I crossed the threshold and stepped inside. The air inside was heavy with solder and paper. The whir of a low-powered fan came from the corner. Dust hung in shafts of afternoon light filtering through the narrow window. My eyes moved across the space automatically, picking up old landmarks. The metal rack of spools and wires, the blinking VHS converter on the shelf above the filing cabinet, the digital thermometer wedged between two bricks on the floor. But something was different this time. A sound, a beeping. I moved toward it, but I didn't reach for it yet. My eyes caught something else first. The chalkboard covered almost the entire wall. He had bolted it directly into the studs years ago. I remember watching him do it, sweating through his shirt, mumbling about how drywall was the enemy of permanence. Now, it was covered in layers of overlapping diagrams, notes, sketches, and pinned photographs. The usual chaos was there, but this time, it was all focused. Everything pointed to one subject: mole people. There were diagrams of hand structures, claw curvature, and comparative models against known burrowing mammals. There were skeletal projections showing how a human spine would have to evolve to function primarily in a crouched, lateral motion. Heat mapping charts had been overlaid with seismographic readings, with annotations in red ink. He'd written detailed estimates on hearing ranges, potential hive networks, and low-frequency signal behavior. Pinned to the center of the board was a photo, black and white, grainy, taken from above. A depression in the earth. The soil looked compressed inward with unnatural symmetry. Below it, he'd written a date, a coordinate set, a single phrase. Too consistent to be weather. I scanned the rest of the wall. A long timeline stretched across the upper edge, all of it converged. He had found something. I realized he had gone to find proof. The beeping grew louder as I moved toward the bench. It was coming from a handheld GPS receiver. The screen was small and monochrome. A single blinking dot pulsed on the display. Next to it was a folded piece of paper, torn at the edge, written in sharp block letters. I recognized this handwriting immediately. "I'll assume you'll be the one to find this, nephew. I knew it'd be you. I finally found something, and I want you to see it. Follow the signal. I'll finally prove myself right to you." I picked up the GPS. The signal was holding steady, still transmitting. I took a breath. My throat felt dry. I took the medicine into my bag, pocketed the GPS unit, and walked out the front door. The GPS coordinates pointed somewhere deep in the northern range, far beyond cell towers or road markings. I had to stop twice to recheck the route, and once to talk myself into continuing. I packed carefully. Water, flashlight, the insulin, extra batteries, snacks. I stared at the receiver for 10 minutes before I even turned the ignition. There was no deadline, but it felt like I was already running behind. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or something heavier. Maybe I'd waited too long. Maybe I had already missed him. But if he was alive, if he was just stranded or hurt or waiting for someone to show up, then I couldn't waste any more time. The last stretch of road turned to gravel, then gravel gave out entirely. I parked beneath a canopy of thin, brittle trees, their leaves scorched from a summer that had lasted too long. The signal still blinked on the handheld. I walked for over an hour, boots crunching through rock and shale, the sky dimming above me. When I finally reached the destination, I thought at first I'd gone the wrong way. There was nothing there, just a low ridge of broken stone and a slope that dropped off into a dry gulch. The quarry was just beyond it, old and half reclaimed by moss and brush. I almost turned back to double-check the coordinates, but something caught my eye. A seam in the cliffside. It wasn't a cave mouth. It was more of a split between two walls of stone, vertical and narrow. Someone could walk past it and never notice. I stepped closer, shining the light into the space. The beam hit nothing, just air. That meant depth. The crack was just wide enough to squeeze through. I adjusted the strap on my bag and stepped forward. The walls pressed close around my shoulders, rough and uneven. Bits of stone scraped at my sleeves. I kept one hand on the rock and the other around the flashlight, angling it downward to avoid blinding myself. I could get through without too much issue, but a small laugh bubbled out of me as I thought about Uncle squeezing through here. My chest tightened as the gap narrowed further, but then, after about 20 paces, it opened. Not completely, but enough to stand comfortably. The space beyond the crack was colder. Still, the sound of my boots echoed softly, bouncing from surface to surface. Dust coated the floor in a thin layer, disturbed only where my footprints had cut through. I saw the first one just ahead of me. A boot print, then another, the heel worn unevenly. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand. I steadied my breath, tried to listen. Nothing. Just the hum of air deep underground. I pressed on, following the prints. They curved inward, deeper into the passage. The air grew heavier. The light from the entrance had disappeared entirely. My flashlight was now the only thing keeping the dark from swallowing me. The tunnel widened slightly, then narrowed again. The ceiling dropped just enough to make the duck. I moved slowly, scanning every inch with the light. Something crunched beneath my boot. I crouched, brushing away dust. A plastic wrapper, torn open, corners folded inward, dust clinging to the sugar residue. I picked it up. One of those glucose chews he always carried. Strawberry flavor. He used to say they tasted worse than cardboard, but they worked fast. A few steps later, I saw the glove. Fingers stiff with dirt, the wrist strap was still cinched. I turned it over. A tear had opened across the palm, the kind that comes from bracing a fall. The ground here was uneven and covered in loose stones. His phone wasn't much further from there. It sat balanced on a ledge of rock, screen glowing faintly in the dark. The plastic casing was scuffed, and the rubber antenna leaned slightly to one side. The signal bar pulsed gently, battery at 23%. I reached for it and stared at the home screen. I held the phone for a moment longer before slipping it into my pocket. Now I know for sure he was here. I stood still and called his name. Once, then again, louder. I saw it just past the bend in the tunnel, tucked against the stone wall where the cave curved. The sleeping bag looked old, almost sunken into the ground, but I recognized it immediately. Faded green canvas with a broken zipper. He had owned it for decades. I remember him using it in the woods when I was still too young to carry my own pack. He used to say that newer ones trapped too much moisture. I moved fast, boots scraping against loose grit. My chest tightened with something close to hope. My voice came before I even reached him. "Uncle Warren," I heard myself say. "It's me. I brought your meds. What the hell are you doing down here?" The beam of the flashlight wavered slightly as I knelt beside him. He hadn't moved. The top half of the bag was pulled up to his shoulders, his arms resting across his chest, hands tucked beneath the flap. His head leaned against the cave wall at a slight angle. His glasses were still perched on his forehead, pushed up the way he always wore them when working on something close range. I reached out and touched his shoulder. The fabric was damp. My throat closed before I could call his name again. I shifted the light downward, trying to get a better look. That was when I saw the color of the fabric change, from green to black, stained through. The canvas wasn't folded in at his stomach. It had collapsed. I gripped the zipper and pulled it back. His chest had caved in where the sleeping bag had dipped. Flesh and bone had been torn apart. His torso was still whole above his ribs, skin pale and drawn, but everything below that had been opened. Not by a blade. There was no clean line. The wounds looked jagged, pulled apart. His abdomen had been torn open in wide, uneven ridges. Muscles and viscera were exposed beneath the shredded fabric of his shirt. The blood had soaked into the bag long enough to turn it thick at the seams. The skin along his sides had deep indentations where something had clamped down or hooked in. I saw striations in the torn flesh, shallow grooves shaped in arcs too round to be teeth. His hands were still crossed at his chest, but the one to his left was missing its pinky. The stump had gone grey. The air around me changed, then the smell reached me. Rot first, sharp and acidic, then iron, thick enough to taste. Behind it, something else. A damp sweetness, the scent of compost that had been turned too late in the season. I clamped a hand over my mouth, turned and doubled over. My stomach clenched and bile forced its way up before I could stop it. It hit the rock floor in a splash. I stayed bent over, gasping, the flashlight shaking in my hand. I couldn't look back at him. Not yet. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe through my nose. I tried to hold on to something else, anything else. But all of it was drowning under the smell and the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears. I forced myself to step back from the body. My legs moved, but my eyes didn't want to leave him. I had to blink a few times to break whatever spell I had fallen under. The flashlight trembled in my hand. I wiped the back of my wrist against my mouth and breathed through my teeth. Then I heard it. A faint scrape, something against the rock. The sound came again, then another, higher pitched, from a different direction. I froze. My grip on the flashlight tightened. I turned, slowly, shining the beam toward the sound. Nothing. I took one step back. The beam shifted. That was when something darted across the far wall just outside the edge of the light. A blur, grey and low. I turned the light quickly, but it was already gone. Another shape followed, cutting across the dust ahead of me. My eyes couldn't track it fast enough. There was more than one. I kept my feet planted, trying to count the echoes of movement. 3, maybe 4. None of them made a sound I could identify, just the soft scrape of nails and the drag of their limbs brushing loose gravel. Were these the things that had done this to Uncle? I couldn't know for sure. I crouched slightly and angled the light across the walls. They weren't climbing, but they were getting closer, hugging the edges of the chamber, staying just outside the illumination. Wherever they were, they didn't want to be seen. I thought of something Warren once told me. Most animals don't want to fight. If you scare them, they wait. But if you run, they chase. It had been during a story about a coyote that followed him for 2 miles. I remembered the way he had spoken then. Calm, like it was more important to think than to react. I could hear scuttling again, louder now. So I stayed calm and tested my theory. I flicked the flashlight off. The darkness was instant, complete, just pressure and sound. The scratching grew sharper, closer. I could feel them now, small displacements in the air, loose pebbles shifting near my boots. Clenched my jaw, counted silently to 4, and snapped the beam back on. The light cut through the dark like a blade. One of them froze mid-movement. For a split second, I saw it. It had crept within 6 feet of me, crouched low, body compressed in a tense arch. It skittered off when the light hit it, its limbs locked in place for a fraction of a second, muscles coiled but frozen. The skin on its back was patchy and raw, hairless, pink and grey. The skin across the skull had been stretched. It looked almost human from the silhouette, but it had no eyebrows or cheekbones. The flesh sat low, sagging slightly under its weight. It reminded me of moles we used to see in the garden, but wrong in proportions. The head was too large, the jaw too wide, the eyes were small, swollen, and dark, but the sclera had a watery gleam. They didn't reflect the light, they resisted it. I watched as the pupils constricted into pinholes. It shrieked, not loud, but high and shaking. Then it turned and vanished into the rock behind it, slipping through a narrow gap I hadn't seen before. A moment later, another shape followed it, then another. My hands were soaked in sweat, even through the fabric of my sleeves. My heart hammered so loud I almost missed the next sound. I turned and ran. All those quiet lessons about staying calm and holding your ground evaporated. Every animal documentary and educational video I'd ever watched crumbled under the sound of claws skittering against stone. I ran hard, light swinging in frantic arcs across the tunnel walls. The beam flickered against rock and dust and things I could not name. My bag clipped the side of the cave. I stumbled, caught myself, and kept moving. I heard them hiss behind me. A sharp click followed, close to my left. Then another above. One of them was moving across the ceiling. I heard the scrape of its limbs and the dull thud of its body repositioning overhead. I couldn't look. I didn't want to see how close it was. My lungs burned, my throat felt raw. The air was heavy and damp and thick with the scent of something. I could see the narrow path ahead, the one I had come through. The tunnel had never felt so long. The beam of my flashlight hit the rock just ahead. That was when one lunged. It came from the dark on my right, a blur of pale limbs and teeth. I turned just enough to avoid it. Its claws raked the cave wall and sent a cascade of dust across my shoulder. I threw my weight forward, pushed off the ground, and ran harder. Then another dropped from above. I screamed. It missed, barely. It hit the floor behind me and skidded, claws dragging. I didn't stop. I knew they were closing in. I felt the weight of them behind me, pressing the air forward, shrinking the distance between us. Then claws wrapped around my leg. My body slammed into the ground. The impact drove the air from my lungs. The flashlight bounced out of my grip and rolled across the stone. The beam swung wildly, strobing through the cave in broken fragments. I kicked. My heel caught something. The grip on my leg tightened, pulling. I clawed at the ground. My fingers found nothing but dust and sharp gravel. Another shape moved in from the left, crawling low, eyes leaking. Its jaw clicked open, saliva dripping from the mouth of a mole. A distorted melody, warped by decades of overuse, blasted through the cave. Mechanical static layered over digital tones. The Motorola. It had slid from my jacket pocket when I hit the floor. The antenna stuck at an angle. The screen glowed. We were close enough to the surface now. It had found a signal. Everything it had missed, calls, voicemails, alerts, had come through at once. Dozens, maybe hundreds. The speaker vibrated against the stone. Every sound echoed through the tunnel, magnified tenfold. I'd always mocked the ringtone. a broken remix of old MIDI files layered with sirens and overlapping voice prompts. It sounded awful. The thing on my leg shrieked and let go. Its arms snapped up to shield its head. The one crawling toward me recoiled, clawing at its skull. Both of them backed away from the phone, their bodies twisting against the walls, trying to escape the sound. One slammed into the rocks so hard, dust exploded from the ceiling. Another scraped at its own ears, tearing shallow furrows into the sides of its head. The ringtone kept playing. The cave vibrated with it. Loops of distorted melody collided with incoming alerts and static-ridden voicemails. I pushed myself up and grabbed the flashlight. The beam caught one of the creatures mid-turn. It screamed and scrambled back into the dark. The crack of the cliffside was ahead. I threw myself through it, shoulders slamming into the stone on either side. The cold air outside hit my face and chest like a tide. I dropped to my knees on the gravel slope just beyond the entrance. But above me, sunlight. I looked up and saw the sky. I never found the courage to go back. I wish I could say I went back in there, retrieved my uncle's body. But I was scared. I gave an anonymous tip to the police. They found the body, and later the cave was sealed off because it was deemed too dangerous. The official story was a lonely hermit losing his life in a cave. But I knew better.